Hey, this is Sandy.
And Randy.
And we're here on AT Corner.
Being an athletic trainer comes with ups and downs, and we're here to showcase it all.
Join us as we share our world in sports medicine.
Welcome back to another episode of AT Corner. We have a very special interview episode this week.
A very special interview episode because not only is this person really awesome, but he helped introduce the two of us.
Yes, he always tells us not to say that. Like, that's not true, but it is very true. He basically made this happen.
From halfway across the country.
Exactly. The very special person we were talking about is Aaron Ngor. He is an ATC and a certified strength and conditioning specialist. He received his Bachelor's of Science in Athletic Training from your alma mater, Chapman University.
That's true.
Yes, it is. He also has a Master's of Science in Athletic Training from the post-professional program at Ohio University. He has worked in the Shape Clinic, Select Physical Therapy, Repair Physical Therapy, AMDA College of Performing Arts, Offset Med, his baby kind of, and the University of Southern California.
So I think the best part of this episode is that it is very specific to performing arts, but I also think that it can be taken broadly and applied to so many different populations on how to work with athletes and patients who really haven't seen athletic trainers.
Absolutely. And I think a great takeaway that you can kind of look at this is, like, even if you're at a place where, okay, maybe you don't work with performing artists very often, I guarantee you whatever school or, setting you're working with or athletes, you probably have individual sport athletes, and they kind of have a similar vibe to the performing artist, because a lot of the stuff we were talking about, I get that same sense when I work with track kids, so you can still take, even if it's not performing arts, you can still take this and translate it to your practice for sure. Which, by the way, I learned a lot in that. Like, granted, I don't work with a ton of performing arts all the time. I still learned a ton.
And I think that's what's so cool is, like, you really don't know what you don't know. So,
Yeah.
like, sitting down before this, it almost opens up a new world of, oh my gosh, I didn't even think about this topic, or that you had such an expert knowledge on this and that I can pick your brain about it.
Also, this can help drive, someone who's passionate about athletic training or passionate about one specific setting that maybe an athletic trainer can be in, and maybe start that avenue. I think it's time we hear from our guy, Aaron.
Let's do it. Randy, start us off.
Let's hit some cryo breakers. So, simple question. What made you become an athletic trainer?
Is it always that simple, though? I guess in my case, it is very simple. It was something that I actually did not know existed. So the first athletic trainer that I got to work with was actually Nelson Chen at Walnut High School. And he probably saw this little Asian kid walk into his room with like crutches and a swollen knee. Just asking, I was like, hey, my PT said I could come here for some ice. Can I have some ice? Because my knee really hurts. I had just come out of ACL reconstruction. And he like looked at me, and I'm clearly not a student athlete. Like, I was your, typical just study by the books student. So he was just very gracious and kind enough to be like, yeah, like, let me get you a bag of ice. Like, let me know if you need anything. And we can always talk more. And I didn't know who he was, but I was just like, damn, I didn't know we had like a doctor's office on campus that wasn't the nurse's room. It was just very confusing, it was very confusing for me,
Yeah.
But I saw like, he had banners of like Hawaii, and I was like, Hawaii sounds like a really nice place. So like little inklings of things that, were to come. So, I left, and as I got into like my senior year, you start thinking about like where to go to school and what you're going to go for. And I had picked his brain a few times just coming in and out of his room. And he was just like, have you ever thought about athletic training? And I was like, no, I always thought it was pre-med and you just go be a doctor. Thought that was the way. And he said, look into it, do your research. And, we talked too about like what he did at the high school. And I was just like, that's pretty cool. Like, you're very smart. So I did that and I applied and, wound up at Chapman, and I took my first class. And not gonna lie, the first athletic training class, it did two things to me. It scared the living crap out of me because you talk about emergencies and blood and spine boarding people, like real stuff. And I'm like, I'm a freshman. I think at the time I didn't even know how to cook, let alone deal with someone's life in my hand. And then the other thing was just like, you get to do like clinical experience, like as you're in school, which, you do your research at the time back when it was like bachelor's degree. And that was like unheard of. So I was like, I don't want to be stuck in a classroom for the rest of my 4 years here. So I think this is something that's challenging and I can see myself growing. And I don't know if it's going to be like the end point or just kind of like a stepping stone, but it's worth my time. So that's how I got started.
Nice. Shout out. Everything you described about Nelson, that I could just picture him saying it. So shout out to Nelson Chen.
And the thing is, in my memory, I don't think Nelson's aged one bit. I think he still looks the same.
No, he still looks the same. Absolutely.
So you're living young. You're living young, Nelson.
Well, Aaron, now that you actually are a seasoned athletic trainer, what is your athletic training spirit animal? And for our new listeners, this is a modality, rehab tool, tape, braces, etc. Any tool of the trade that you may or may not have known that existed that represents you as a clinician.
Oh, man. I have thought long and hard about this question. And I feel like this maybe not spirit animal, more like animals, are actually the other athletic trainers that I get to work with. I think out of every place that I've been to, like tool wise, modality wise, I'm really not like impressed that often unless I walk into like a full, suite with like strength and conditioning, AT, the whole shebang. But other than that, you don't see that too often. But you will get, and I'm always surprised at just like the quality of people and interesting ways that other athletic trainers work. And that inspires me to question my own stuff that I do, but also learn stuff from them as well. And I think that just like strengthens all facets of how I practice. So it's always fun to just, I guess you'll never find myself working as a solo athletic trainer. Rarely. I'm usually with other people or like talking with other people about stuff.
Speaking from knowing you, that is the most true statement in the whole wide world that you could have just said right now. I feel like that spirit animal just like we could be done right now. Okay, we know what Aaron's about.
Well, also it encompasses our show apparently, because that has come up a lot about working with others and how important it is and how it shapes us and other people as clinicians.
And I know we're going to talk about that later with Offset Med and the team of healthcare professionals you have. So I'm really excited about that. But first, let's kick it off with a story or experience, case study about working within the dance community, which you do a lot.
It is. And I feel like I've acquired quite a bit ever since I kind of stepped into or made up my mind to just like work with performing artists. It's hard because there are definitely, I have some really high highs and also like really low lows. And I guess the one I'll share was probably the most pivotal moment in my like career. I had worked with a young dancer, and he was very limited by his back pain to the point where, and you guys may get patients or clients like this too, where they live with it for so long. It's been so debilitating for them that they almost feel like they have to turn themselves into a healthcare professional because other people are failing them. Because, visit after visit, consultation after consultation, it just doesn't make sense, where people don't believe what they're feeling, or they're not getting the care that they deserve. So, I think I had just started doing private practice at the time, and I onboarded him as a client. And, there's a lot of now that I reflect, there's a lot of ego. There's a lot of I have all the tools. I know what to do. I'm an athletic trainer. I'm not like other athletic trainers or PTs. I'll be this guy's fix and solution. And just just if I could just tell myself that and reverse that and be like, look, get a hold of yourself, man. I think the outcome would have been a lot different, because the way probably would have presented the outcome, the prognosis, and how to deal with flare-ups and stuff would have been a lot better. And this person did get a little bit better, but ultimately plateaued. And I had consulted with, you guys know, Scott, and he was finishing PT school at the time. I consulted other chiros, other doctors, TJ as well, for any alternative holistic treatments. I felt very limited in my ability to help this person. And ultimately, we ended up having a conversation where we had to terminate early, because I was like, I don't think I'm doing you the service that you need me to do. So I'm going to refer you to other people, and, you can do your research in this area if you haven't done it already. And that was a very humbling moment for me, because even though I was a dancer and I know the style that he was doing, and the background and community he came from, we had mutual friends, we kept in contact too, and all these things that I felt initially I thought was all you that you needed, and you just fill in the service part and you're good. It still didn't go the way that I wanted to. And it was a eye-opening moment where it was just you still know everything. You don't know. And if you don't know, you better learn, and find people that know. So, since then I had reinvigorated my fire to go into more CEU learning stuff, find mentors, whether it was CEU approved or not, just be in the room with people that dealt with chronic low back pain, which is very difficult to treat, for at least before I had got into it. It was always such a mystery for me. Now I feel I have a good understanding of it. Obviously I could always point out my own weaknesses and flaws with it, but compared to how I practiced then, which was probably late 2018, early 2019 to now, it's so different. Just even that gap of time. So yeah, that's a quick little story.
Always being a student. That's what we are. Always students.
Very true.
I mean, I think even that highlights the fact that, going back to your spirit animal, how you utilize people around you, and how important it is to be within the healthcare team.
And recognizing when this is too much, or I don't know what's going on. Recognizing I need help with this.
And it's so much better for the patient.
Absolutely.
Yeah, agreed. And, even as I say it, the actual conversations and the way things played out, it still left me feeling uneasy. Man, I totally let this person down. And it wasn't until a year later that he had actually found a coach that actually gave him more structure and program for his mobility for his low back, and he improved a lot. And he created a post, and he included me in the post publicly. And I was like, man, I haven't worked with you in years, but what I've realized, and this is a common theme that I'm able to reflect now, is that it's almost me being a dancer really doesn't matter in the sense of understanding the biomechanical load and like stress that's placed on them. But actually, it's just like I'm a person that can identify them, that they don't have to like retell their story to and like explain. Like it's like one chunk of this narrative that they can just like, you know, we can just move on from it. And it's like a first access point, right? You know, you guys always hear that athletic trainers are often like the first healthcare professional a student athlete may interact with in the overall healthcare system. And so I think dancers are kind of like the same way, where they're like, I would rather go see someone who's a dancer, even if they may not have XY experience or whatever, but like it's like a starting point. And for him, it was like a starting point. But because with the knowledge and experience that I brought, I was able to direct him into like, you know, your time is probably well spent in these avenues rather than chase this rabbit hole, you know? So I think that was probably what was helpful.
Yeah, I think that's important, especially for like niche settings like that, or niche sports where, you know, a lot of people want to work football. You know, a lot of people like basketball and working baseball, like the major sports. And to have something that has such a like an intimate group, to know that you're coming from their background, or at least, you know, understand their background and respect it, it makes them feel like, oh, like you're here for me. You're like, you're my athletic trainer. And that's always the sense I got with working track, is like having someone that's either done track or has worked in track. They just feel a little bit easier. Like, okay, like you kind of get it.
Yep.
You're not going to tell me just stop running forever.
That's worse, isn't it?
Yeah, that connection and rapport that you build with your athletes or patients is like so much different than just coming in with a background knowledge of, okay, this is how you treat an injury, but how do you treat the person?
It's true. They're people at the end of the day. They have wants, desires. They want to, you know, get out of the pain. They want to just, you know, live, like not just wake up, but actually like enjoy their day, right?
So we've been throwing around this performing arts word, but can you define actually what performing arts setting entails?
I feel like I'm probably the least qualified person to do that, because I've stepped out of the research realm, and so someone may have a clearer definition for me. I think mine is more of like a functional definition of the word.
Okay.
Like performing artist is like there's traditional performing artists that we like know, right? So you have like your actors and actresses, your dancers, your musicians. And then you have, I guess, like what I would also include under performing arts is kind of like anyone who's involved in the production and creation of the arts. So I would include like, you know, stage techs with it. I would include like costuming. I would include, you know, camera workers, cinematographers, filmmakers, writers as well. Like if you're in the business of creating artwork, and also not just like the, you know, the back scenes of it, but actually like help produce something, right? Then you're a performing artist to me. And I feel like popular like celebrities will also like ride that line as well. You know, like if you're a singer and you have to like perform on stage and you have like 5 tour dates back to back, you're a performing artist. Like you have to put on a show at your best.
Yeah.
And if you're not at your best, you're losing money, you're losing fan respect, people are going to be upset. There's consequences to it, just like there are in athletics, you know? So I think the parallels are very, 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 very transparent, at least for me.
So you mentioned how broad a performing artist can be. What populations within performing arts have you specifically worked with?
Yes, I have specifically worked with mostly dancers, and now have like further pigeonholed myself into working with like hip hop and street dancers. But
oh, that's cool.
The interesting thing about doing that is you realize that no matter what kind of like form of artists you work with. Some of them will have sports background. Some of them will have martial arts background. Some of them will have other interests outside of dance too. So, now it's like I've worked with such a variety of people that yes, like you would call them a hip hop dancer, but then they're like other things too.
So, were you a breaker yourself? Is that the proper term?
Yes. So there's also a lot to unpack in the terminology of hip hop and street dance and all that. So, yeah, breaking, b-boying, b-girling, right, is one of the pillars of hip hop itself. And I did get started in that style early in the beginning. And that was like, at least for me, when YouTube was just, getting started. And I was seeing videos of these crazy power heads, which are a breaking style that predominantly focuses on very like powerful rotational spinning movements, jumps, explosive transitions. And there's a really huge powerhead group in Korea called Gambler's Crew. And they're just monsters. Like you see them move and you're like, this looks like gymnastics on crack. But it was really inspiring because it's just like, and I think this was also at a time where, you don't really see a lot of like Asians in like media. So to see like these group of Asians just like so strong and just killing it and looks like they're having fun. I was like, this looks like something I want to do in my life. Like forget school. I'm going to be a professional dancer someday. And then you go through actual like training, and there's just some things that the b-boys that are breaking today, they have like gone through that limit, that barrier. For me, it was like my head hurts, my elbow's getting bruised, like my body's getting beat up. Like this is painful. Like why would anyone push through this pain? Well, that's why they do it, So yeah. That's why I ended up transitioning to other, I guess like art forms. So, I transitioned to other styles like popping, which is very coordinated, like isometric contractions and isolations of the body. And that was actually created here on the West Coast. A style that was created on the West Coast. So it's very like funky, very groovy, but then also like very powerful when you like kind of hit the pops. And then eventually was like, this was really cool. Like I wonder what other art forms exist that I don't know. And that got me like super interested in exploring like what dance really is. And that in itself could probably be a whole nother conversation. But long story short, it's like that was where I started. And then now where I spent the bulk of my training was back into like choreography. So taking movements, stringing them together in sync with music, and then teaching other people,
yeah.
This was before TikTok was there and everyone was not thinking learning dance moves were cool.
So once you recognize that, this population, especially breakers, they can benefit from an AT, how did you start introducing your services as an athletic trainer, and what challenges did you find associated with trying to start providing those services?
Yeah, it's strange in the sense that I actually didn't think breaking, well, I knew they needed services, but that wasn't where I started with my services. I went directly to the community that I knew best, which was kind of more like studio companies and other like studio owners, like, which is actually like very far removed from like the freestyle and breaking culture. But, I figured I would be able to find people that would need ATs there. Not saying that they don't, but I think what I realized later was that, especially with the skill set of an athletic trainer, being with like acute care, emergency management, and also like on-field, on-site assessment, like that kind of quick response, you quickly learn that the dancers in the studios deal with a lot more like chronic injuries. Not that I didn't enjoy treating that. I just was like, well, where can I put this skill set of athletic training to use? And I had wanted to do work with the breaking community, but the thing is with the breaking community is just like, it's a community for a reason. Like, people recognize the same faces that rotate through the scene, and you have to like gain trust so that people can recognize who you are. It's almost like, you know, if you're like a b-boy trying to like represent yourself and get respect from the community, you have to battle. You have to like show other b-boys that you know your stuff, you got your foundation, and you can perform and battle. So for me, coming in to the breaking community, like, I'll be honest, I kind of just assumed that they're going to be injured and hurt just based on like what I already knew about dancers in that scene. But my buddy of mine, Dylan, was actively participating in the breaking community. So he took me to a couple of local jams first. And that was when I was like, okay, I think we could do something here, but I need to make sure that this is a community that I can still connect with, right? And understand better. Because you see it on TV, you know, you'll see it on like media and stuff, but when you're actually in the parking lots, when you're actually in the studios, the clubs that all these ciphers and jams are happening, it's different. And the conversations you have there, the relationships you build after like showing up, it really does open the door for them to be like, oh, like, what do you do? Like, if you see someone hurt, it's like, hey, like, is everything okay? Like, just start by like caring about them, asking about them, because no one really does that. Like in the breaking, or I guess old school breaking mentality is just like, just battle through your pain. You know, like, don't let the opponent know that you're hurt or injured. Like, you got to look tough. You just have to like show out, even if it means like you're going to be really beat up the next day. Like, that's just part of it, right? But obviously with our skill set, our education, we can help them, and we can help them actually perform better for longer in a more sustainable way. But we got to get that buy-in first. So that was how I kind of got started in, and it was just literally showing up to where the breakers practice and compete, watching them, actually like learning what was going on and talking with them. And then we eventually met organizers of like these jams and ciphers. And I just told them, I was like, hey, you know, would it be cool if I could just bring a table, bring some supplies, and just like work with some of the dancers that are here. And most of the time they're like, sure, like we can make it happen. And these were like, you know, very like, we were still starting off, and they were like smaller scale events. So I think at a local level, it's a lot easier to do that because it's more personable and there's not too much on the line. And I was very fortunate for that because that allowed us to connect with a lot of different people, and people spread the word once you do a good job. And I can literally trace back how we got one event contract to the next one because of one person that we just happened to meet.
Wow, that's crazy.
It is actually so cool to see like the growth that, you know, you just started showing up with the table, and then when I was volunteering with you guys at that dance jam, It was like we had a whole crew of people who were stationed out at like different areas in the dance jam, and like the area where there were tables, and then like out in like the quote unquote field, right? Where they're actually doing the dancing and breaking. And I remember watching and thinking that this is nuts that there is no like healthcare based in like because there was someone who every single time they would do something on their arm, I'm like, I'm about to see a dislocated elbow. And then there was that guy who he had growths on the top of his head because his body was used to doing backflips landing on his head.
Yep.
Like, that's nuts. That's not what the human body like does.
For them, it does. Like Wolf's Law, they're definitely using it to their advantage in that case. But there are actually invented protective equipment now for that. So there's like special.
Wait, really?
Yeah, there are official headspin beanies that are made to where there's actually padding here. And then I think there's like another company in Europe. They made spin caps. So they look like your regular kind of like 5-panel caps. And then they have like this insert that you can put in the cap. So you still got style and protection.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy. I never knew that.
Well, the amount of neck strength too that you need for that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. It is, and this is things that TJ and I have talked about too is, right now, I think the youth breaking is like the biggest, at least I've ever seen it. So they are obviously getting coached by other breakers or adult breakers. Some of them are very good, very reputable. Others, could use more experience teaching, not exactly like dancing, but like teaching and coaching under their belt. And I think when you look at it from like a structural point of view, that's where you're able to identify a lot of the things that are like we take for granted in normal, like I guess sporting culture. Like we still have issues. Don't get me wrong. Like you can still have problems with like the little league coaches and like the trainers that work with XY athlete in their gym and they're not doing really true strength conditioning. It's still happening in ours, but I think the one thing that you guys alluded to already is just like, well, first there's no healthcare personnel at these events. And the ones that do see healthcare personnel, they're typically the older dancers that have created some sort of steady income to be able to afford to see their own private person, or they have health insurance to see a doctor. But even then, it's like hit or miss whether they understand what they're doing or not. Now we're starting to see more developments in terms of like coaching and breaking. I think that's definitely like blown up a lot. But we're also at this era where it's like, it's hip hop was created not too long ago. And so the ones that were there are finally like in their like, 40s up. Right. And so they're in a position now to like give back, teach, coach, all that stuff where maybe, 30, 20 years ago, they're still like actively competing, So it's like we're going through a generational change as well, where it's like, I think maturing enough to where the original generation can pass down knowledge to like this newer generation and so on and so forth.
So as a clinician, how did you adapt working with the breaker population? And I think you worked with marching band also
Yes.
after working with traditional sport athletes, because that's kind of what you learn in school.
Yeah. That was the biggest question. How the heck do I take what I'm learning on the sidelines of a football field, of soccer, baseball, and apply that to what I'm seeing here? That was, the best way I can describe it is that I'm like taking little bits and pieces of the best that I see wherever I work and observe and trying to like recreate it for the dancers. And I think the context will depend on whether it's like I'm looking at what can I presently give them now, and what can I sprinkle the seeds for like the future, because it's going to take funding, sponsorship, investors, and also like qualified healthcare professionals that are interested in this and are willing to take this responsibility on, not just myself, right? So when I worked the sideline of football, that's where all the critical thinking, acute response, stress management, and like technical organization skills really pay off. Because like you said, when we were out working the breaking competition, we don't have an abundant amount of resources. We don't have a full staff often, all the time. So if you're responding, you're probably going to be like the sole responder, and what do you do at that point? Well, I mean, it's the same thing as what you would do at, wherever you practice, but this time you have to think about it in layers. Like, okay, well, if I am responding here and I only have X, Y amount of people, it may not be plausible for me to spine board somebody. I don't have the resources or the personnel to do it. So I need to make sure I talk with the event staff so that they know if this happens and I am telling them that this is going on, that we need to make sure that we clear the area. We have to like stop the event so this person can be escorted safely. And that's just one example, right? Like other examples could be like when I went and did my internship at UNCSA School of the Arts, I worked ABT ballet. And the stuff that I saw there with the ballerinas, they're suffering from a lot of like, lower extremity injuries. Some of them even had like, I guess like scoliosis and just like kind of childhood development. I don't even know what the word or is politically correct terminology is now. Pathologies. And so me working with them, I'm like, okay, well, how do you stabilize their ankle if they have to return to the studio for XY choreography or pattern? So I take that taping technique, assessment technique, return to like jump technique, and look at the movement patterns that the breakers are doing. I'm like, okay, well, what applies and what doesn't? They may still need that really like low tape, very clean tape job that I would use for a ballerina for, final return to sport. But for them, like, where can I put that in their phase? Or do I need to actually do like a full like heel lock on them if they do like one style that's very it's going to be a very challenging on the ankle, versus where another dancer style may be like they need to be very free, they need to be able to like jump, land, absorb all that stuff. So I think it just becomes so I guess this is why like in my brain everything just meshes together. I don't really see like differences as much anymore. So it's like the body is the body. You analyze the demands, and then you just go from there. I do think even from like marching band, that's the one thing that I see common is just training load. The lack of awareness of how much load is actually being put on their bodies. Because and I'm going to try not to offend any ATs that actually work with marching band members, but at least in my experience in the college, a lot of them, some of them don't really identify as an athlete. If you tell them that you're an athlete, they will probably think that you're joking with them because their lifestyle isn't athletic. But what they do on the field is, yes, it is very athletic. but it's like an
100%.
identity thing. And some of the understanding and like attention and resources, education that marching band members get, it's not there all the time. I mean, it's very rare that I find that they have a dedicated healthcare professional that works with them. So what I see in breakers is like the same thing. Like, it's just, I can't talk to them about load management if they don't even know what that is, you know, or the concepts behind it, right? They're like, I'm going to practice until I fatigue out, but I'm going to do that as often as I can when we meet for practice. I'm like, what are you guys doing at practice? We're doing X, Y, Z. And I'm like, so what's your focus? What's your intention? Like, what are you trying to get out of it? And they're like, everything. We're trying to dance, you know? And I think the details and the way that we parse out specific performance things in sports can be applied to dance. It's just that conversation hasn't happened as frequently. I think the interest is growing, so that's a good sign. But yeah, those are a couple examples.
I think that's definitely interesting what you brought up about how, like, you know, the ATs that were kind of like traditional sports or like team sports, there's a little bit more, I don't want to say structure, but like kind of like a structure for those teams. Like they have a practice plan, you know, whether the coach is doing the appropriate practice plan is always questionable, but they at least have a plan and they have a target like, hey, here's what we're trying to hit today. So I think that's, if you're coming from that environment, it might throw you for a loop to talk to, you know, athletes and be like, oh, I'm just trying to do everything.
Yeah. And I also believe that the level of dancers that you work with will play a big role in it as well. And I've had this conversation with other dance medicine professionals too, is that like it's such a broad spectrum. Like you could say I work with dancers, but the majority of your patient population are like adolescents and even like, you know, children. Like you get in the studio young. And so the skills that you specifically will use like 80% of your time there is like proper communication, attention to consent for treatment, how to make things that are facilitating long-term athletic development and not, you know, the consequences that we see with early sports specialization, and the injuries that come with like hypermobility at a young age and stuff like that. For most dancers that I work with, especially in like hip hop and breaking, they actually get into that later on in life. They're usually a little bit older. And so I actually see like, you know, for example, there's a couple dancers that I'm already thinking of that they're like the opposite of that. They're like, they're old, they're hypomobile, you know, they work a job and then they break when their team or their crew meets up, and then they peace out, they go out, go eat, go back to their family, or, you know, do whatever they need to do. And even in like the, you know, collegiate choreography scene, like you talk about lifestyle imbalances, like that's probably where it's at. You know, they wake up for classes, some of them are in extracurricular activities, and then they show up for practices at nighttime, and then they stay till like 12 a.m. and then, you know, at that point, like what's open? Fast food's open. I'm gonna go get some fast food, and then they get to bed at like 1, 2 a.m. because they have to do homework, and then the cycle repeats. So I think even the niches within dance, like you run into your own set of problems, so to speak, that, you know, athletic trainers can help and intervene. But I think you really do have to ask yourself, like, how do you want to practice, and like, what do you want to focus on? Like, what do you want to impact, and how to change this? Yeah.
I'm going to go back real quick to when you were talking about adapting to working with like the chain of command, and you have to know who to talk to clear the space and everything that you were talking about. I mean, if you just look at how we work with, let's say, basketball. Okay, you know that if you're going to take someone out, you're going to talk to the coach, or before you go on the court, you have to make sure that the ref, in general, you have to make sure that the ref,
there should be some contact,
calls you out or whatever. Yeah, exactly. Stuff like that, where you know all of that working in basketball. But if you're working with like a different population that athletic trainers are not as involved in, like breaking, then you just really have to know the chain of command. Who do I need to talk to? Or like in theater, okay, who is the stage manager? Who is in charge of taking people out of, if I have a safety concern, who can I go to? And I think that's what's really important that you touched upon. That was, okay, so this is how, if I want to start working with this population, I need to know the chain of command, essentially.
Yes, agreed. And I steal a lot of concepts and learn a lot from what's already been established. So like when you said like theater, that in terms of protocol wise and how you practice these things, Cirque du Soleil is like top of mind. I think they rehearse their EAP like, I don't know, like once a week or more than that. No, at least once a day for their shows. I think I saw like a presentation once and they had like a calendar planned out, and I was like, this is elite level stuff. And they have everything mapped out, the roles and who's doing what, who's in charge of what. When I think about how we like work backstage, it was like all the early experiences I had working with like at UNCSA, at the Shape Clinic with Dr. Russell in Ohio, and what I wanted to do with like what I saw people doing at like Broadway. And I think it was just like, how can I recreate these experiences, but for the community and population that I love, right? And I think that's why those thoughts from like, how do I adapt this to that, came so naturally, because it was always in the back of my mind, like I've had too many experiences where I've like just sat on the fence, in a dugout, on the sideline. I'm looking at what's happening in front of me. And then I look at the other athletic trainers working for me, and some of them are like, they're like in it. They're like, sometimes I ask like, are you here to watch the game or actually like treat? Not that it's a bad thing. I just, that level of appreciation. That's what I have when I'm at these events. Cause I'm like, wow, like I can enjoy it, but then also like when I need to be on it, like the switch is on, cause that's like the beautiful thing about being pressure cooked in sports medicine is that you're very good at, responding, staying adaptable and flexible, and just like getting what needs to be done. Right. So I think that is, I think that's just like how I've just lived my career at this point. Now it's like I have something to show for it. Before it was just thoughts in my head.
So offset med, we kind of touched upon briefly, and obviously like we have a good population of people who know what that is because you guys are really cool. But for some of our listeners who might not know what that is, first of all, can you kind of explain like what offset med is? And then I want to touch upon like, how did you get that team of healthcare professionals that you have together?
All good questions. And, we've actually done other podcasts where people have asked me what offset med is. I'm pretty sure if you listen to them, everyone will be different. So I guess here's the most updated version.
It's an evolving
concept. But yeah, and at the root of it, offset med is really a collective of health and movement professionals that are geared towards working with the hip hop community, whether it's like breaking, popping, crump, house, punking, whacking. Like it's such a art form that is it's so hard to explain now because like I've slowly begun to realize that like the reason why hip hop was like globalized is because the like concepts and teachings and like impact of it is like very well understood. Maybe not verbalized, but like people can like understand like what it is. And so it influences the music, and then the music influences the dance, and then you have all these like dances that like sprout out. And I feel like Offset Med is just one sub niche of that is like created to like honor everything that has been created for us that we use and consume. Now we're just supporting the people that are actually being able to like continue this legacy on, because it's like it's really overlooked. Everyone loves to hear their favorite music on Spotify, but then what happens if that artist can't perform? Whether it's a vocal issue, whether it's like an injury and they can't do their tour. Like, imagine how many people would be so upset if Justin Bieber couldn't perform his tour.
Seriously, yeah.
So, and TJ works with a couple people on Justin Bieber's tour. So there's stuff that happens, and it's like a whole production. And I think that's why I love it so much, and that's why Offset has credit. It's like we're here to serve the people who are producing these great arts and are great performers. They deserve the respect and have access to the same resources that Alvin Kamara does, that Otani gets at the Angels.
I love how you keep bringing up the common theme of this episode about working with others and having a team with you. How do you highlight each of your guys' strengths when you work with these athletes? Because everyone's coming with a different background. They're a different professional. So how do you highlight these strengths they have?
I'm going to say it's very messy in the beginning. Like when this idea got started, it began with just kind of like inviting other clinicians to like just be in the space with me. I think early on it was me, Rob Sy from Dance Prehab. Rob's a physical therapist. Miguel is a physical therapist. Scott is a dual credentialed AT and physical therapist, and officially orthopedic clinical specialist because he paid a lot of money
awesome.
and
Nice.
studied a lot for that. TJ is.
If we've learned anything, we know Scott's a nerd.
Scott's a
we
nerd,
know that.
Hardcore, but I love that about him. TJ is occupational therapy assistant. And who else was with us in the early days? I think it was just those guys that showed up, and we were Carl Flores, personal trainer, strength coach. And we were just kind of like talking about what it would mean to like create something for our dance communities. And I remember the first time I had gathered everyone to show up to do like an event type thing, we didn't even have it really defined, like it wasn't like, okay, here's athletic training, here's event medical. It was like, it was if someone came to ask me like what you guys were doing, I was like, I'm just here to help out. It was definitely not very formalized yet. But because of that, we also got to explore what this thing could look like, also learn how each other practices and see what personalities fit, what personalities didn't fit. And I think that was really important because the lessons kind of kept going and showing up as I kind of try to finalize the final group of people that would be Offset Med. Like working with a PT. So now I'm talking about Scott. He is very thorough and sees it in a couple different lenses in terms of like what injury means, what pathology is, what are the best practices for treating certain clinical conditions and disorders, and what the most current like what's the word, like guidelines to treat them. And, I'm lucky enough to like kind of question him and like learn what he's doing, the modalities that he's choosing, the manual therapy techniques he's learning. And then you have someone like TJ come in who is occupational therapy by background and training, but has also taken like the same courses that, we would take in terms of like rock tape, in terms of, other types of manual therapy works. And he has a whole different way of working with somebody because he also brings his like alternative medicine, holistic healing, Eastern medicine perspective on top of his already occupational therapy perspective. Like if there's anything I've learned working with TJ is that, a lot of the like neuro and communication, soft skill stuff, OT's got. So I think it complements AT's like, initial learning of very like hard ortho, MSK very well. And then you layer on PT with it. It's like that additional rehab side, the additional kind of like, I guess like daily living and quality of life details that tend to get missed. The crazy thing is that after working with them and seeing their perspectives, it's like everything just kind of makes sense. You're able to see like the whole picture. And just because you see the whole picture doesn't mean you'll remember to do it, because like, your patterns are hard to change if you don't actively work on them. So, it's like there's a safe net or a safety net if you miss something, and they're there with you. We've been fortunate enough to connect with other healthcare professionals in the field. Dr. Gutierrez, he's like the dance medicine doctor of Orange County. And then Dr. Tina Wang, she's also an MD that is out in quote unquote like Inland Empire. She works with a lot of patients with EDS, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and hypermobility in dancers. She's very good at that. We've worked with chiropractors, Kinetic Impact out in San Diego. They're the original medical crew that worked with Beyond Babel, which is Keone and Marie Madrid's Broadway production. What else? Massage therapists. We've met a bunch of really cool massage therapists, personal trainers and coaches that, the common theme is that they were either a dancer or performing artist, but have now transitioned into like the healthcare or movement profession. And they see what we're doing and they're like, oh, damn, like I can actually give back, or I can still work with my peeps, because typically that usually didn't really happen, especially in the choreography community. It's kind of like you do your time. It was fun. It was cool. And then if you don't go on and teach, own a studio or choreograph, then you just move on with your life. And then, you have that whole like, oh, I used to be a dancer type of mentality, and people leave. And it's like, when you see that happen, you literally have human capital leaving and not reinvesting it back in the community. And so you wonder why nothing really changes, right? It's because all the people that are able to leave, get an education, they just stay out there. They never return. So Offset Med actually ended up turning to something where we could help create like a feedback loop for people that have this knowledge, and now we can create a platform and space for them to like interact and give back.
Nice. That's awesome. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
So this is Sandra's favorite part all the time. I feel like I say it every interview now.
Yeah.
It's like my first go-to, but she's all about action. What's the action item, babe?
All right, Aaron. From what we've heard from you today, what do you recommend to someone who wants to work with a population that's not very well represented in athletic training, just like you did with Offset Med and Breakers?
I guess I have a couple things. So let me get my laundry list out.
Awesome.
I think the first one is don't doubt yourself, because other people will. I can clearly remember moments where I've had interactions with friends and even my own people, athletic trainers, that say like, what are you doing? Or like, I don't know how you're going to do that. And, honestly, I didn't know either, but you figure it out. And I know it's easier said than done, but it's pretty much like, don't be afraid to put yourself out there in whatever capacity you feel comfortable in, and also within your, like, know your limitations, right? Like, don't do something that'll get you in trouble, because if you really care, you probably won't. But I'm just saying as a disclaimer. But just put yourself out there, whether it's like starting off with just visiting or still staying an active participant in whatever niche that you're in. I think that was probably the biggest thing that helped me in terms of my confidence, is that while I was doing athletic training, I was in school, even working at one point, I was still like on teams. I was still in crews. I was still performing. So
nice.
They get to know you as a person, a teammate, and then that already builds the trust for like, oh, you're an expert at this, like, come help me out. And so that would probably streamline it and make it easier. Other than that, is, if you didn't get the theme already, it's make sure you're connected with people who care, right? And it doesn't have to be people in your industry. I think some of the best mentors in my personal career, they weren't athletic trainers. Some were, but not all of them. And I'm really grateful for them. And they helped me in not just like my professional career, but like the personal development that kind of goes with it. As you try and figure this out, like, you're also growing as a person and going through life events too. And the people that you choose to lean on, they will have their own experiences and insights that will probably help you break through some of the hardest moments. So, yeah.
I was so glad that we could have Aaron on.
Oh, absolutely.
And like you were saying, there's so much that could be applied outside of performing arts.
Yes.
Which I think is just really cool in general, because we have such a broad spectrum as athletic trainers in general.
Hey, it's like one of I think it was for National Athletic Training Month one year, or some kind of motto put out by the NATA. Every body needs an AT.
I love that.
Yeah. Boom.
So if you guys like this episode, please share it with a friend. If you guys are new, we do every other episode as education or stories. This one was an education episode. So next week, we're heading back to our stories from athletic trainers. And if you want to submit your story, make sure you go over to our Instagram stories so you can see what our next topic is and submit the different polls and all that fun stuff. We also have a Facebook group that you can join to network with other professionals or just talk about the episode that we're talking about.
Absolutely. And question of the week.
And we do question of the week. So if you are interested in joining that, go to facebook.com/group/ATcornerPodcast. You got anything else to add, Randy?
Nope, that was perfect. Thank you for helping us showcase athletic training behind the tape. Bye.